I've put the bands through the slots and tried on the sandal, and it fit very nicely. So then I punched stitch holes here, since this end of the band goes under in this direction and the other turns out to be caught in the seam stitching. So I'm just going in and out of these holes, and then when I get back to where I started, I'll tie a knot here on the back of the sandal. And the stitching will be complete. I'll tie a knot here and ready for the next step. So I'm ready to punch holes through both layers. I'll cement on this natural rubber below here, and then I'll pull the stitches very tight so that it's compressed and the stitches aren't laying on the ground. I checked the bands and they fit very nicely. So ready for the finishing steps. Since I have a vegetable tan leather top sole and bottom sole, I want to sand and burnish the edges and then make the stitching grooves. It's important to do this on the bottom of the sole, as I've said, so that the stitches are tucked up inside the leather a bit so they don't get worn through. But I'm going to make a similar groove on the top sole, so I'll know that when I punch holes here, they're going to go directly down into the groove on the bottom sole. So that means I'm waiting until after I have made the groove to mark where the stitch holes go. And so to do that, I copied the stitch marks from this pattern here, and then I'm going to transfer them onto here. So I'll use my silver pen and mark these, and then we'll punch. So for hole punching, this 0-0 drive punch is the one that I use the most. And you can also, there's also a punch that has kind of a diamond-shaped end, so you don't actually take out a little tiny circle of leather. It just kind of pushes the pieces of leather to the side. So it makes a different appearance to the hole, but actually I kind of like that. Doesn't have that big empty hole. So you might use this. You can also use a thonging chisel, and this will make slits, and 3 slits at a time, or actually 2 slits at a time, because first you punch the 3 and then you put, well, let me show you. And these these prongs are 1/8 of an inch apart, so you'll be making more holes and stitching the stitches will be closer together if you use this. Now, when I use this thonging chisel on leather-soled sandals, I have a hard time getting it out. So what I do instead is, so in this sample sandal, I'll just go around here, so I'm not paying attention to the silver stitch mark holes, and you can see that I'm putting my first prong into what was the last prong of the previous hit. And so I'm just going to go around here and make, in that groove, I'm going to make the marks. And then I go after that with the single prong and redo these deeper, but it's much easier to pull this out than it is the 3-prong. I'll show you how to make the 2-needle running stitch that I'm going to use to stitch this sandal together. I'm going to catch these ends of these straps, and the edges have been burnished as best I can. It's hard to see, but there is a little sheen on here, and it does look nicely smooth, and the pores kind of close shut along the edge of the leather. So I'll start somewhere in the arch area. I have a needle anchored on each end of this thread, and I'll even out the lengths first. So now I have the same amount on the top and bottom, and since this thread is pretty long, I'm going to shorten the thread by making this loop on each end bigger. So I'm ready to do the 2-needle running stitch. Obviously we've got 2 needles here, and let's see which ones. So the one on top, I'm headed counterclockwise, and I'm going in the next stitch hole, and then I'll take the other end of the thread and go back up through that same hole. So let's see, so you can see I'm going back up through that same hole that this thread just came out of. I might check again that I've got the ends the same length. And every time I make a stitch, I'm going to pull so hard to really get it seated and get the thread down deeply as I can into that groove. So that's what I keep doing all the way around here. Bring the needle from the top to the bottom. It's nice if you get a rhythm going of always bringing the thread from the back over the thread from the front. Your stitching will look a little better. And when you are ready to go into the next hole, pull the thread out of the way that's in that hole so that you don't split the thread. Okay, I've got another stitch. I'm pulling really tight, and just do one more, and then continue on around the sandal. So I'm pulling the thread from the top through to the bottom, and here I see that I've got the thread on the bottom under the thread from the top, so I'm going to make sure to switch that around so that I'm going over, and I'm pulling this thread that's already in the hole over to the side, and then I am pulling tight to seat the thread in the groove and to look good from the top. So I'll continue on around the sandal, and we'll show you how to finish it when I get to the end. I've stitched all the way around the sandal and am ready to take my final stitch. So I'm going in this last empty hole, crossing this needle over the other one, pulling the one that was first in there over to the side, pulling really hard. And I'm going to take each thread around a couple of times additionally, just to fill that hole with a waxy thread. And take this one around. And leaving the ends on the top, giving a good pull on both threads. And then I'll clip them off flush with the top sole. I put a little neat's foot oil on this sandal to dye it a little bit, so it's all completed. It's a rather bland looking sandal because I have a hard time using my best leather for a demonstration, but I'm sure you'd appreciate seeing some other examples. This one being folded and taking advantage of these little diamond gem rivets you can get at leather companies like Tandy's or Springfield Leather. And then this one has a rubber sole, so you can see how the stitches are kind of, well, I guess I'm not sure you can see that, but the stitches are pulled up. And then this is a one with gemstones, semi-precious, turquoise and amber, wire wrapped to the sandal. So that gives you an example of so much that you could do with these bands, whether it's loom beaded strips or it could be different colors of fabric. And if you wanted to start a business just making these sandals, your variations could go on forever on what you could provide on these two bands. So I hope you have fun with sandal making. I want to show you a few other ways that you can attach straps to the top sole. This was done with a 3-prong thonging chisel, 1/8 of an inch spacing, and that's really nice. If you have that tool, then you always have your stitches equally separate, equidistant from each other. And I like the way that the stitch looks in a little slit more than in a round hole. Then this shows if you want to make an X instead of a line of stitching, you can do that. Or here's a sandal with just a little bit of stitching there to hold those side straps in place. Here you see a sandal with a leather bottom sole, and so I've made a groove, and those stitches are all in the groove. I didn't clean the edges of this until the sandal was all cemented together so that I would be sanding and burnishing it at the same time. I'd be burnishing both layers and sanding both layers at the same time. And if you're using the natural rubber, of course, you don't have to do that. You just do the top sole and then cement it to the rubber.